Hello everyone and welcome back to Masterclass Excel. I'm Tom. In our last lesson, we turned our order logs into smart dynamic Excel tables that automatically expand and copy down formulas. Today, we're tackling one of the most powerful and practical tasks in the entire world of spreadsheets, lookups. A quick aside, mastering VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP functions is your fastest path from data novice to an analytical asset. While a VLOOKUP handles the legacy systems that many companies still rely on, we're going to be focusing more today on XLOOKUPs, which offer a modern, flexible power that'll let you merge messy data sets and extract your insights instantly. And demonstrating fluency in both of these formula functions signals to hiring managers that you can hit the ground running, automate manual reporting, and turn raw spreadsheets into actionable business intelligence without needing any hand-holding. So let's dive in. Imagine you're building an invoice or a monthly sales report. You've got a list of order IDs, you've got some invoice IDs, you've got product IDs, and you know how much of each product was sold based on the product ID. But we'd like to bring more information to this table. We want to know, based on this product ID, what is the product name? What category does that product fall under? How much does that product cost? We also want to know, based on our invoice IDs, what the customer name is, who the customer was that ordered the product, and what region that customer is in. And as we fill in this information today, by the end of the lesson, you're going to know how to connect separate worksheets instantly using Excel's lookup functions. You're going to master the modern bulletproof XLOOKUP formula. You'll be able to understand the classic VLOOKUP formula and why the matching rules in that formula matter. And you'll be able to break down every single part of a lookup argument so you always know what your formula is doing. Let's dive in now and solve the search problem together. So as discussed, we have some basic information on our invoice template here, but we want to bring in a lot more information. Now we're going to start with the product information. I've got a few other tabs on this spreadsheet. One is called Master Inventory. This is a list of all of our product IDs, and for each product ID, we've got a product name, a category, and a unit cost. We've also got a list of customer information based on invoice IDs. So each invoice has attached to it a customer name and also the region that that customer is in. It's important to point out here that each of these sets of information have a column that contains unique values for every row. This means there are no duplicates. You do not have more than one row for invoice 5000. You don't have more than one row for invoice 5014. On our master inventory, the product ID is the unique value in that table. We do not have more than one product name called PRD101. There's only one of them, and it's a wireless mouse. But for now, let's go back to our invoice template. And the first thing I want to do before I go fiddling with any of the formulas is, of course, turn this entire data set into a table. And to do that, we're going to click anywhere inside the data, press our keyboard shortcut Control-T, and here's our pop-up. Yes, my table has headers. Click OK, and now we've got a table. Notice that it included the column headers that we typed in, even though there's no information below. It included them as part of the table. We'll go to the Master Inventory tab, Magic Key, Control-T. Yes, it has headers. And let's finally do the same thing for customers. Control-T. Excel does not have a perfect track record when it's trying to recognize whether your data set has headers or not. In this case, we're going to have to tell it, yes, my table has headers, to make sure that it knows these are all invoice IDs, these are all customer names, and these are all regions. Now you might think, I already have all the information I need. The product name, the category, and the unit cost, based on the product ID, are already listed in my master inventory. So product ID PRD107 for the desk lamp. Well, why don't I just go ahead and type in desk lamp here? And what's the category? Let's see, the category is electronics. You can already tell it's going to take me forever to fill out this entire table. We don't want to do work. We want Excel to do the work for us, and we're going to employ the XLOOKUP function to automatically populate all of these fields based on the information we've already got stored in our master inventory list and in our customer list. And to make things even more organized, let's go ahead now and rename all of these tables to something meaningful. So on the Table Design tab, for customers, I'm going to rename this table Customers. Master Inventory tab, I'm going to rename this Inventory. And our invoice template, I'm going to go ahead and rename that Invoices. Now that everything's labeled properly, we can get into our XLOOKUP formula. So let's work on the first field here, product name. As we just saw, the product name is tied to the product ID, and both of these pieces of information are listed on the master inventory table here. We've got product IDs, we've got the product names, the category, and the unit cost. We want to bring in the product names. So let's start by typing our formula. As always, the equal sign. And we're going to be using the XLOOKUP function. So I'll start typing XLOOKUP. Excel knows that I'm trying to initiate the XLOOKUP function, so I can just press tab and have it finish typing the word for me. Now, the first thing it's asking for is the lookup value. For example, a specific product ID from the current row. We do want to look at the product ID because we know that is the common field in both the invoice template and the master inventory table where we want to get the product name from. So the lookup value is going to be the product ID. Press comma. The next thing it wants is the lookup array. An array generally means a range of cells, not just one cell. So this is where we want Excel to be looking. We want Excel to look for this product ID somewhere else. We want to bring in the product name. So where is that somewhere else? We're going to be looking up the product ID on the master inventory table where both the product ID and the product name are listed. And again, it's asking for the lookup array. So I'm going to select the entire range of product IDs. Press comma again. The third thing that it wants is the return array. Again, this will be a range of information. This is what we want Excel to bring back into our invoice template once it finds a match. So we're going to highlight the entire product name column because we're trying to bring in the product name into our invoice template. I'm going to end parentheses and press enter. And look at that. For every product ID, it has gone and looked on the master inventory table, and it sees product ID 107 is for a desk lamp, and it fills that in. And it does that for every single one of these. If I filter just on, for example, PRD 111, it knows these are all noise canceling headphones because they're the same product. I go back to the master inventory table, and indeed, product 111 is noise canceling headphones. Now let's try that again. Let's take the category from the master inventory table and populate it here based again on the product ID. So equals XLOOKUP. I'm going to tab over to let Excel finish the function for me. And now we can start selecting our values. The lookup value again is going to be PRD107, the product ID, comma, the lookup array. I'm going to be looking at the master inventory table for the product ID to match it to the invoice template invoice ID. And now finally, the return array, what we want to bring back into the invoice template based on the match of the product IDs, the category. So we're going to highlight the array of categories on the master inventory table, end parentheses, and press enter. And now it has brought back every category related to the product name based on the product ID that is in both this table and this table. So the lookup function works when you have a common field in both. In this case, when we're bringing in our product information, the common field is the product ID from the invoice template and the product ID from our master inventory table. And the final piece of information we want to bring in based on the product ID is the unit cost. So once again, XLOOKUP, this time I won't be lazy, I'll type the entire formula and open parentheses myself. And the lookup value, again, is going to be the product ID, comma, where do we want the formula to look on the other table for product ID? We want it to look here in the product ID column, comma, and then finally, what do we want to bring back into our invoice template? We want to bring back the unit cost, and parentheses, and now we filled in the unit cost for every one of these products. So in each of these cases, when we close parentheses and press enter, Excel scans the master list here, it finds the match here, and it brings back the value that we wanted it to. In the first case, it was the product name, then we told it to bring in the category, and finally we told it to bring in the unit cost. Now, Let's go back to the unit cost formula, and let's take a closer look at the formula bar to make sure we really understand the mechanics of what this function is doing. It can look intimidating if you view it as a block of text, but if you think of it as more of a sentence, it really helps you understand what the formula is doing. So if we read this formula as a sentence, we want Excel to look up the product ID, compare it to the product ID on the inventory table, and bring back the unit cost from the inventory table. And that's what it's done here. Now we'd also like to bring in the customer name and the region from a separate table that we've got called customers. And to bring in this information, we're going to pivot and we're going to take a look at the VLOOKUP function as opposed to the XLOOKUP function that we've been learning so far in this lesson. We're going to start the formula the same exact way, equals, and then instead of XLOOKUP, we're going to start typing VLOOKUP. Excel knows what I'm trying to do, so I'll tab out of that. Now, VLOOKUP is similar. It takes a couple more steps, and there are some limitations to it. So the first thing it's asking for is the lookup value. Just like the XLOOKUP function, the lookup value is the thing that we're searching for on the current table. In this case, we know the customer name is in the customer table and is linked to the invoice number. So our lookup value is going to be the invoice ID. Press comma. Now it's looking for the table array. This is where this function strays significantly from the XLOOKUP function. When VLOOKUP asks for the table array, it does not want me to just go and pick the invoice ID to match it to the invoice ID that's linked to our customer names. Instead, what it wants me to do is highlight the entire range and keep highlighting until I've included the value that I want to bring back, which in this case is the customer name. So this is the table array that the VLOOKUP is asking for. It wants me to highlight both the lookup value column, invoice ID, and also the return array column from the XLOOKUP, which of course is going to be the customer names we want to bring in. Not only that, after I press comma, it wants a column index number. What this means is it's asking me to count how many columns from the column where the lookup array is to the column where the result I want is, and that's the number that I've got to put in here. So there's one column, and then the result column is 2 columns, so I have to type 2 and press comma. And finally, it's asking me for a range lookup. And this part can be very confusing because in most cases, you're going to be typing the word false into this formula. And what that means is you're looking for an exact match. You can also put a true, which is looking for an approximate match. This is almost never used. A VLOOKUP is a classic Excel formula, and for all intents and purposes, the XLOOKUP function has pretty much replaced it. So for the sake of argument, range lookup is almost always going to be the word false. Close parentheses, enter. And this formula does work. It brings in our Charlie Williams. But let's try that again. We'll delete this. Let's do a VLOOKUP equals VLOOKUP. I'll do it a little bit faster now. So first it's looking for the lookup value. That is the invoice ID. I'll press comma, the table array. It wants me to select not only the array of the things I'm looking up, but also the array of the things I want to return back into the invoice template. Press comma. Now I've got to tell it how many columns that was. 1, 2 columns, 2. And then finally, for reasons I'll explain at some other date, I have to type the word false here, so it's looking for an exact match instead of a partial or approximate match. Press enter, and there we go, we've got the customer names. And compare that to the XLOOKUP function that we were just working with. XLOOKUP, I want to look at the invoice ID. I want to find that invoice ID on the customer table, comma, and I want to bring back the customer name, end parentheses. It just seems a little bit quicker to use the XLOOKUP function than the VLOOKUP function, and not having to count how many columns over, because let's say we wanted to redo the unit cost. Using a VLOOKUP function, we'll bring in the unit cost, VLOOKUP. I'll tab over. The lookup value that we want is the product ID, comma, and now it wants the table array, which means I've got to do some counting. I'll go to the master inventory tab. Now there are 1, 2, 3, 4 columns between the product ID that I'm using to look up the value and the unit cost field, which is what I want to bring back into the invoice template. Got to put a comma there, and I have to tell it 4 columns so that it knows that I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4 columns to get the value that I want to bring back into the invoice template. And then finally, I have to type the word false. And there we go. It does work, but it takes a few more steps, and having to remember how many columns you're counting over to get this value here, the column index number, just a few more steps than the XLOOKUP. XLOOKUP makes things a bit simpler. And to kind of complete this table, let's go ahead and bring in our region. And to do that, let's go back and use our familiar XLOOKUP function where it wants the lookup value. The region that the customer is in will be coming from the invoice ID. We're going to look for that invoice ID array on the customer tab, comma, and we're going to return the region. Close parentheses, press enter, and there we go. Now we've populated the region for each of these customers based on the invoice ID that each customer is tied to. And just for fun, let's review a couple of things that we've learned in previous lessons. First, the unit cost. I think that should be dollars. So I'm going to hover over the table until I see this black down arrow, and it's going to select all the values in this column without selecting the header row. And on the Home tab, I'm going to click the $ button to change these numbers into a currency format. Now we've got a nice $ and currency format here. And we'd also like to see what the total amount is that we should be invoicing each order for. So let's add a column here for total cost. And when we add information, the table knows and it adds a column for us. And this will just be some simple math. For total cost, we're going to time travel back to the very first beginner lesson, equals, and very simply, going to select the quantity, asterisk to multiply by the unit cost, and press enter. And now we have a total. And since earlier we turned our data set into a table, if I want to see which customers spent the most, I can click the drop down above total cost and sort largest to smallest. And now we can see Bob Miller and Hannah Wilson both spent the most. They each ordered 3 ergonomic chairs. Now look at what we have accomplished today. We took 3 separate data sources, our order log, master inventory, and customer list, bridged them together seamlessly using lookup formulas. You now know how to write an XLOOKUP. You can break down its arguments like a pro. You can avoid the pitfalls of the older formulas like VLOOKUPs. And your spreadsheets are no longer isolated islands. They are interconnected systems that can talk to each other. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I'll see you next time when we take our analytics even further.